Alright, I'm back with some more halftime facts. This is the 1934 World Cup halftime facts. Rounds 1, part 4. So this is the final 4 teams that I'm going to discuss in the last 16 the round of who competed at the 1934 World Cup. We've got Austria, Hungary, France, and Egypt. Egypt making it in their debut at the World Cup, being the very first African nation to ever compete at the World Cup. Austria and Hungary also making their debuts, as well as France being the only team in the 4 that I just mentioned that has competed at the World Cup, previously being one of the original 13 in 1930. At this World Cup, the 1934 World Cup, Austria do make it to the semi-finals, being knocked out by Italy, who eventually do win the tournament. Austria do withdraw from the next 2 tournaments, the 1938 tournament in France and the 1950 tournament in Brazil, but return to the World Cup again in 1954, where they go on once again to reach in the semi-finals, this time around again losing to the eventual winners, and this time being West Germany. And funny enough, in the next tournament, the 1958 World Cup, they end up losing to Brazil on Brazil's way to win the World Cup. So 3 World Cups in a row that Austria competed in, they lost to the eventual champions. Austria do come up against France one other time in 1982. This time around though, they do lose, and France are the ones that end up reaching the semi-finals. That was the 1982 World Cup in Spain. And moving on to France now, France do end up hosting the next World Cup after 1934. They hosted the 1938 World Cup, and then 60 years later they go on to hosting the World Cup for a second time in 1998. This time around though, they do end up winning the World Cup. Both the 1938 World Cup was the last World Cup to take place before World War II, so the 3rd pre-World War World Cup. And the 1998 World Cup, which they hosted, was the last World Cup of the 20th century. Okay, now the tie between Hungary and Egypt was the very first time at the World Cup that an African nation took on a European nation. Hungary themselves have reached 2 World Cup finals. They reached the next World Cup final after 1934, 1938, where they got knocked out by Italy, defeated by Italy and Italy retaining, and they reached the 1954 World Cup final, where they were defeated by West Germany previously in that same tournament. They did defeat West Germany 8-3, which was the biggest defeat for a German team. However, later on in the actual final, West Germany was able to defeat Hungary. That Hungarian team has the best goal to match ratio out of any nation ever to compete at a World Cup. And finally, Egypt, as mentioned, are the first African nation to ever compete at the World Cup, and they had a chance to compete at the World Cup previously, the 1930 World Cup, which Uruguay were the hosts. Unfortunately, there was a storm in the Mediterranean Sea, which prevented Egypt from taking the ship to head off to Uruguay, so they missed out on that. But they did qualify for the 1934 World Cup, as mentioned, being the first African nation to do that. Egypt don't qualify for another World Cup till 1990, which again Italy were the hosts. And the last time they were at the World Cup was in the 2018 World Cup. So they've been in 3 World Cups in total, but as of now still have not managed to win a game at the World Cup. Alright, that was my 1934 halftime World Cup facts, round 16, part 4. Thanks for watching, listening, as usual, appreciate it.